Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah Daf Memchet. We're going to get started from the top of our daf. The last two Mishnayot we saw, we're saying there were three types of houses, there were three types of stones, and right, that are used for idol worship, and these are the ways they can't be nullified, these are the ways they can be nullified, and these are the ways they don't even need nullification. We're going to do the same thing now with an Eitz Asherah, with an Asherah tree. So we're going to learn what exactly is an Asherah tree. So Shalosh Asherot, there's three types. Ilan sheneta'o mitchila l'shem avodah zarah, harezo asura. If we planted the tree specifically for Avodah Zarah purposes, then it will be forbidden. Gid'o upislo l'shem Avodah Zarah v'echlif. Notel mashechlif, same like all the other cases. If you trim the tree or cut, right? Gid'o sounds like you chopped off a part, and pislo is you trimmed it, like you made it nice and did nice landscaping there. But you did it in order for it to grow more for the Avodah Zarah, and then you can worship it. And then hichlif, and then it grew more. No telma shechlif. If you cut off the part that grew from the moment that you said it was going to be for idol worship, then it's nullified. And me, just like the plastering and taking off the plastering. If you put up an idol underneath and then removed it, meaning it was just temporary, just like we put the idol in the house or we put the idol on the stone and then moved it, you don't even need to nullify it. Which sounds like, though, if you put this as a place where you in a permanent way worshipped idols underneath, then the tree would be forbidden. We're going to come back to this idea in the next Mishnah. Amri Debei Rabbi Yana. We're going to have two parts of the Gemara on this Mishnah. In the house of Rabbi Yana, they said, this middle case, where if it grows and then you cut it off and it goes back to its original state, that's if you either sent a shoot, like replanted one of the shoots for coming out of the tree, or you did grafting in the tree itself, then what grows from it will be forbidden. Now, Gemara is going to say that doesn't make any sense. It says you don't have to start grafting or havracha to do this shoot into the ground. Even just trimming, pruning it is enough to forbid the growth. Again, we go back to the focus of this is not what is forbidden, the growth. The growth will be forbidden either which way. But the question is, how do we nullify it? And the chidush here that Rabbi Yana is adding is not just if I pruned it, trimmed it, and what grew, if I cut off that, I can go back to saying the rest of the tree is fine. But even if, even if I did the grafting and the replanting the shoot with the gufosha ilam, that basically changes the nature of the tree itself, the body of the tree. As long as I take off anything new that was added from that point on, it goes back to being not actually idols. You might have thought, since I did have racha or hakava, it was already much more serious. Maybe it's as if I planted it from the get-go to be for the tree purposes, for Avodah Zarah purposes, and the whole thing will be forbidden. Therefore, what Rabbi Yana is teaching us is no. It's no different than pruning for these purposes. I can nullify it very easily by just cutting off anything new that grew. Okay, that's the first part. The second part is the statement of Shmuel. This is going to be the more complicated part of our sugya. Amar Shmuel, Hamishtachaveli ilan tosafte asura. If you bow down to a tree, anything that grows from the tree from that point on is forbidden. So Mativ Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, how does this fit with our Mishnah? What did our Mishnah say? Bowing is not enough to make it forbidden. What do you need to do? Gid'o upislo lavodah zarah v'chalif. No tel m'shechlif, which sounds like gid'o pislo in, lo gid'o v'pislo lo. It sounds like you either need to cut off part of it, trim it, something in order to make the growths forbidden. But if you didn't do anything to it physically and you just bowed down to it, that wouldn't make the growths forbidden. So how do we explain this? So the first explanation is going to be the Gemara suggesting. Amar lecha Shmuel. Shmuel could say, Hamane Rabbanani, Ushmuel da Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. We're now going to bring back this machloket about, makes sense, a tree that was planted not for the purposes of idol worship, but then was being used for idol worship after. what did we learn? There's machloket, Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, about whether the tree is forbidden or it's not forbidden, right? Tanakama holds the tree is not forbidden because the tree was planted not for the sake of Avodah Zarah, and it's attached to the ground, and we don't forbid the tree. And Shmuel says, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, we're going to forbid it. Remember, he learns it from Ashrei Hentigadiun, and we said, right, there's Ashrei Hentis for fun, Ashrei Hentigadiun to cut and not uproot, right? So what kind of tree is cut and not uprooted? This exact tree. Because, right, it wasn't originally planted for Avodah Zarah. And then that fits perfectly because we didn't really talk about it then, but it sounds like if you're going to learn it from Ashrei Hentigadiun, then you're going to basically say we only need to cut that tree. We don't need to uproot the whole tree, just the growth, just what I bow down to. So now let's go and explain it. Shmuel, who says you bow down to the tree, whatever grows from there is forbidden. That's Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, we're going to read it inside. Shmuel Damar Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. Da'amar ilan shenita'ol v'asaf avdo asur, right? Because if you planted it and then you worshipped it, it's forbidden. And forbidden is what grew after you bowed. And the rabbis who disagree with him, that's going to fit with our Mishnah because they say it's not forbidden. Only if you pruned it, right? Trimmed it, only then will the growth be forbidden. But if you didn't do that and you just bowed to it, it wouldn't be forbidden. That's the first possibility to explain it. The weakness is that Shmuel doesn't fit with our Mishnah. And Shmuel doesn't fit with Tanakama's opinion, only with Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. So it's a bit of a weakness. Now, Rav Ashi is going to challenge this explanation. Matkevla Rav Ashi, and based on his challenge, is going to basically assume that we have a different understanding of the machlok of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and the rabbis. Mimaida Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbanan b'tosefet plik. The way you just explained it is that their whole debate is about the additional part, okay? And that, right, it sounds like their machloket is, how do we treat the additional part? Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says the additional growth is forbidden. That's Shmuel, right? Shmuel fits with that. And the rabbis think the additional part is not forbidden only if you did pruning or something like that. But that's not what they were talking about there. But he says, Dilma tosefet l'divrei hakol asur, u'bi'ikaro pligi. Maybe everyone agrees that the additional part is forbidden. Maybe even Tanakama think that whatever growth there is after you bow down, of course that's going to be forbidden. What don't they forbid? The base of the tree itself, because the rabbis say it's attached to the ground and it was planted for the right reasons. So anything that was until I turned it into an idol isn't forbidden. It's only what grew once I turned it into an idol, once I bowed down to it. So that's what we're going to say. To Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Savar Ikaronam Yasur. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says the trunk, right, the base of the tree, the trunk, everything that was there before, is also forbidden. Why? Dichtiv, now pay attention to what they're going to say because it's the opposite of what we said earlier. Dichtiv Ashrehen Tzrifum Be'esh. Because it says we have to burn their Asherah, burn it completely. And he claims that Pasuk. Now, it's not what we said before, but let's just ignore what we said earlier. He says that Pasuk is coming to talk about a tree that was planted for the right reasons, later became an idol, still has to be completely burnt. For Rabbanan Safrei, Ikar Ilan Shari, Dichtiv Ashrei Hentikadeiun. Ezu Ilan Shigidu Asur Vikaro Shari, Habeomer, Ze Ilan Shnitol Vasaf Avado. Now, I just want to point out, these are words that in Daf Mem Hey were in the mouth of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, not in the mouth of the rabbis. Okay, we're going to get back to that in a minute. But right now, we're going to say, Ashrei Hentikadeiun, according to the rabbis, is coming to say, well, what tree is cut? The tree that's cut is the one that was originally planted for good purposes and then became an idol. And that's why we only have to cut it, meaning we only have to cut the tosefet off. Even the rabbis agree with that because of that pasuk. Okay? And that must be our tree. And the part they disagree about is the part about the bottom part. That Rabbi Yehuda says you have to completely get rid of this tree because someone worshipped it. The whole tree is a problem. And the rabbis say, no, just the growth. Okay? And then they're both going to fit with our Mishnah because our Mishnah is talking about growth and they both forbid growth. Okay, well, the truth is we're going to have to figure out our Mishnah. Mishnah is a little tricky. So our Mishnah says growth specifically when what I wanted to say, what I meant to say is they both fit with Shmuel. Shmuel can go according to both opinions because someone who bows down to a tree, the tosefet, is forbidden. Later, we're going to have to get back to the Mishnah. So hold off for a minute on that. Now, I just want to remind you what we did on Daf Mem Hey, though. We had a whole ping pong back and forth between Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and the rabbis. And we kept saying, what does this one do with this pasuk, that one do with that pasuk, if you remember. And I keep mentioning this, but now I'm going to say it straight on. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, in the end, they proved it. Now, it wasn't Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and the rabbis talking. It was the Gemara trying to put words in their mouth. What would he do with that pasuk? What would he do with that pasuk? What would he do with that pasuk? Okay, remember that. That's important. So when they were doing that ping pong back and forth, what we said was that Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda's explanation must be, it says Tisrafun and it says Tigadiun. This must be talking about two different types of trees. Tisrafun is the one that was planted originally for Avodah Zarah, and Tigadiun is the one that was planted for the right reasons and only later became an idol. And that kind of supports the first reading, which is you only have to cut off the top part according to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. And the rabbis don't even think you need to. Okay? But what did we say the rabbis did with that pasuk? They did something else entirely. They said that teaches you that when we get into the land, you have to just cut the trees, the ones that we use for idol worship, that were planted for idol worship. Then you conquer the land, and only after that you destroy them completely. And that's the Tigadiun and Tisrafun, different stages. So now the Gemara says, or Rav Ashi says, if you don't like my explanation and you're going to complain because it doesn't fit with what we talked about earlier, the fact that they don't explain Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and the rabbis the way I just did, they use the psukim opposite, right? And ipuch Rabbanan le Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, u'd Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda le Rabbanan. Just flip what we said in the ping pong, say that each one understands the psukim the opposite way. And that actually the Tigadiun is the proof pasuk of the rabbis and not the proof pasuk of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. And the reason why I wanted to point out before this was just the Stam Gemara, putting words in their mouths. And that's what we could just switch it. Say maybe they were wrong about which pasuk goes with who. Okay, so that's not a crazy answer. However, this doesn't get a fit with our Mishnah at all now because in King Gid'o Pislo Man Katanela. Who holds Gid'o Pislo like our Mishnah? Our Mishnah says Gid'o Pislo, the Tosefet is forbidden. Lo Rabbanan, but Lo Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. That doesn't match each opinion. Why? Rabbanan, if you say it's the rabbi's position, who thinks the Tosefet is forbidden anyway, below Gido Pislo Nami Tosefet Asura. You don't need to prune it in order for the Tosefet. All you do is bow down and already, right, without doing any action whatsoever, any additional thing that grows after that, even the rabbis agree is forbidden. And Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, if you're going to say it's Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, well, for sure not, because Ikar Ilanami Asur, it's not even the Tosefet. The whole tree is forbidden. Whether Gido Pislo, whether not Gido Pislo. So why would you say Gido Pislo the Tosefet? The whole thing is forbidden. So now we're stuck. Rav Ashi doesn't really fit. His explanations don't have either one fitting with the Mishnah. But we're not so stuck because now we're going to explain it both ways possibly. Okay, we can explain our Mishnah through Rav Ashi's eyes, through his explanation, both according to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and according to the rabbis. You can explain it this way, you can explain it that way. We're going to have an ABBA, right? This you could do like the rabbis, you could do like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. Now we're going to have the explanation for Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and then we'll go back to the explanation for the rabbis. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, below Gid'o Pislo, Ikar Ilan Aser. Without Gid'o Pislo, the whole tree is forbidden. That's Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, according to this explanation, right? Because their whole debate is about the tree itself. Bistama, that's bistam, if I didn't do anything to the tree. Aval Gid'o Pislo, but what if I start trimming the tree for the purposes of Avodah Zarah? What am I showing? We're actually going to be more lenient because Gale Adate de B'Tosefet Nichale, B'Ikar Ilan Lo Nichale. I've basically shown that I actually want the Tosefet for the idol worship. That's why I'm pruning it so it can grow more for the idol. And I'm showing that I don't really want to worship the whole tree. I just want to worship the extra part. That's what makes Gid'o Pislo unique. And that's why even in a normal case, the whole tree will be forbidden if I just bow. But if I first do Gid'o Pislo, I'm showing that I only want the Tosefet. According to the rabbis, we're going to go the other way. Gid'o Pislo is more strict. Now the whole problem was Gid'o Pislo. What do we need it for? Even without Gid'o Pislo, it's forbidden, right? The Tosefet. So Gid'o Pislo eats Drichale. Sal Kadata Chamina. You might have thought, okay, now it's going to be the same, whether I bow or whether I also prune the tree. However, and just the Tosefet is forbidden, but you might have thought the Gid'o Pislo is worse, okay, the opposite. Since I did something to the actual, I did an action to the tree. Maybe Ikar Ila Nami Litzar, maybe we'll actually forbid the whole tree. Kamash Valan, that's why the Mishnah tells us no, it's not the case. Okay, so that was all again, let's just review this section. We won't go back at the end of the daf. We have three types of Asherah, just like there were three types of stones, just like there were three types of houses. Each one needs nullification, doesn't need nullification, can't ever be nullified. Okay, then we had Rabbi Yanai who added to the middle case, even if you've grafted it or did something with the shoots and replanted them, still you could just cut off the extra. That's the middle case, that would work. Then Shmuel came and said, if you bow down to a tree, the additional part that grew is forbidden. We had to figure out, does this match Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda only? And then the Mishnah matches the rabbis, or is there a way to explain it all according to everybody? And that's what Rav Ashi did. Now we're moving to the next Mishnah. Ezu hi Asherah. What is an Asherah tree? Kol sheyesh tachtea avodah zarah. If you worship underneath the tree, idols, that turns the tree into an Asherah tree. Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Rabbi Shimon omer, kol she'ovdin ota. No, you have to worship the tree for it to be an Asherah tree. Umaaseret Saidan, and there was a case in Saidan, this is in Lebanon, in a mixed community, right? There were also idol worshippers there. There was a tree that people worshipped. And they found a pile of rubble underneath. Rabbi Shimon said, look underneath. And they actually found underneath the tree an idol. According to his opinion, what did Rabbi Shimon say? Clear here they worshipped underneath the tree, which means that even though this was known to be an Asherah tree, it's really not. Or even though, whatever, Natir lahem et ha'ilan. Say the tree itself is permitted because they weren't worshiping the tree, they were worshiping idols under the tree. And only when they worship the tree is an Asherah tree. So the first question of the Gemara is going to be, Ezu Asherah? What do you mean, what type of tree is an Asherah? Ha'anan shasherot. Now, we already just gave three examples of an Asherah, right? There's one who you planted for the purpose of Avodah Zarah, there's one who you trimmed for the purpose of Avodah Zarah, and there's one who you put up a pesel underneath temporarily. That's not a problem, but if it was permanent, it would be a problem. So, and notice that, by the way, disagrees with Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon says if you put it underneath the tree itself is not Avodah Zarah. So they say hachi kamar. What it really meant to say is like this. Shtayim, this Mishnah is responding to the previous. Shtayim, two of those ones you mentioned, l'divrei hakol. Everybody agrees, a tree that you worship and a tree that you pruned in order to worship the growth. That's for sure forbidden. The echad, the last one, is machloket to Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan, because Rabbi Shimon won't think that that's an Asherah. Ezu hi Asherah, and read it like this. What is the Asherah shenechleku Rabbi Shimon v'Chachamim? That's how our Mishnah reads. What's the Asherah that they disagreed about? Okay, and then they have this debate. Is it that they worship Avodah Zarah underneath, or is it they worship the tree? Now we're going to ask, what is a sign of an Asherah tree? How do you know? If you get to a place, how would you know that there's Asherah there? So I'm a Rav. If you have these komar, right, priests or something, we're sitting under the tree. It's like a beautiful fruit-laden tree, and they're not touching the fruits. Because they view it as a consecrated tree, right? They view it as an idol. They won't eat the fruits. Shmuel Amar, he adds, Afilu Amri, Hane Tamrit Lebe Nitzver Fe Asr, Derami Beshichar Vashate Lebe Yomedan. If you hear them say these dates are for Bein Nitzrfe, which is their house of idol worship, it's forbidden because they're going to take the dates from here, make beer for them for their holidays, and that's a sign also that they view this as a tree for their idol worship. And Amar Meimar says, Amar Sabat Pupadita, the elders of Pupadita told me, Hilchata Kishmuel, the halacha is like Shmuel. From here we go to Amud Bet. So to review as we go along, second Mishnah was Chloka Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. What is Asherah? How does this Mishnah connect with the previous one? Right, the last line of the previous, so the third case was actually a subject of debate, Shimon and the rabbis. And what are the signs of an Asherah tree? Now, what if I know it's an Asherah tree? Lo yeshev b'tzila. I can't sit in its shadow. And what we mean by shadow, we have a tree with the leaves, and then we have the part underneath, which is clearly shaded by the tree. It's not what we're referring to. We have the parts on the side, okay, if you make like a triangle, that go out to the sides, and there's a shadow, which sometimes it's long, sometimes it's short, right? Different times of day. If I sit under that shadow of the tree, I'm basically benefiting from the tree, from the shade, and that's forbidden. So now we mean not under the tree itself, like the line of the tree where the leaves end, but outside the tree where the shade is coming from the tree. I can't sit there. However, im yashav tahor, but if I sit there, I won't actually become impure. We're going to learn later on in the Mishnah that the rabbis decreed that Avodah Zarah has impurity. And if I sit, impurity like a tent, like oil. see it's Rabbi Yehuda ben Batera's opinion, but the point being, I think that's who it is. We'll see. Yeah, Rabbi Yehuda ben Batera. And I actually will become impure if, like an ohel, if I'm on top of idols. So let's say we assume there's idols underneath the ground, then I'm going to be tme'ah, because the rabbis wanted me to distance, right? All these halachot are to distance yourself from the Avodah Zarah, so people won't also think that you're worshiping Avodah Zarah. If you go under the sashera tree, all sorts of possible reasons. The Rishonim raise a bunch of reasons. Anyway, if I sit in the shadow of the tree, but not underneath it directly, I'm not impure. I remain pure. But lo ya'avor tachtah, but I shouldn't go under the tree. Ve'im aval tameh. But if I did, and if I did, I actually become impure. That's the difference between the shadow, being in the shadow of the tree, and under the tree itself. So again, I can't pass under the tree. I also can't sit in its shade on the sides of the tree. But there's a difference, because I won't be tameh, impure, if I'm in only the shadow, but I will be if I'm underneath the branches and the leaves of the tree. Hayta gozelet et harabim. What if it branches out into Reshut harabim? And it's basically blocking, it's stealing public space. Va'avar tachteh, and I pass underneath because I'm in the public domain and I walk under this tree, tahor. I don't become tameh then. I only become tameh if it's in private area. If it juts into the public, I'm not going to become impure. So we're going to talk about all this, and one of the questions we're going to ask is, am I allowed to pass under there, or is it only if I did anyway, I won't become impure, but I shouldn't really ideally walk under there? It's not so clear. So lo yashev b'tzila, to which the Gemara says, what do you mean I can't sit in the shadow of a tree? Of course I can't. I'm benefiting from an Avodah Zarah tree. What's the question? Pshita, it's obvious that I can't sit there. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, lo nitzcha ela l'tzel tzila. What they wanted to teach you is, even when the shadow is very long, what happens basically in a long shadow is that the first part of the shadow is much stronger. The end part of the shadow is very little shade. So maybe you would think that that's not so much, right? And they're telling you you can't sit in the tzel tzila. That's the unique part, not just the shadow. Now, what's the difference between tzel and tzel tzila? So the commentaries explain, if you measure the height of the tree, and then you measure from the base of the tree that same amount to where the shadow juts out, that's the length of the regular shadow. A longer shadow is going to be beyond that line. So that's what we're distinguishing, okay? There's two areas outside the tree where you can have shade. One is the part that's up to the length of the height of the tree, and then there's beyond that. So what this is saying is, the Mishnah is really talking about tzel tzila, to which the Gemara says, wait a minute. So if it's not talking about the shadow and just the extra part of the shadow, michlal de betzel komata im yashav tameh, so does that mean if I'm in the shadow up to the height of the tree, I'll actually become impure? Because the Mishnah is not talking about that case, so it must be I'm impure. To which they say, no, that's not true. It's actually talking about both. And what it's saying, if I'm up to the height of the tree in the shadow, right, the first part of the shadow, even though I'm not anymore under the tree itself, but I'm still in its shadow, it's fine, because I'm not under the tree itself. So I'm not going to become impure. But the chidush, the unique halacha they're trying to teach you here, with the focus on lo yeshev b'tzila, is hakamash malan afilu l'tzel tzila lo yeshev. Don't think that you can sit though in the extended part of that shadow. No, you can't even sit there. That's the chiddush, with the stress on the first. Remember, there's two sentences here. Don't sit in its shade, and if you did, you're tahor. It's actually talking about both. Everything applies to both the tzel and the tzel tzila. But the real chiddush is, don't sit even in the tzel tzila. That's the first version. Now we're going to have the second version, that the real chidush is on im yashav tahor, and it's going to be the exact reverse mirror image of this sugya. So now they're going to say, some people learned this whole sugya about the last line of the first line, the last part of the first line. Im yashav tahor. If you sit under it, you'll be pure. Im yashav tahor pshita. Obviously, if you sit where the shadow is, you're pure. Who would think you would be impure? You're not even underneath the tree. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, comes Rabbi Yochanan. What does he say? Lo nitzcha ela l'tzel komatan. Now this time he says, oh no, it's needed to tell you, if you're within the height of the tree, in that part of the shadow where it's a strong shadow, you might have thought you become impure. Chiddush is you don't become impure. So now they're going to say the same thing. Now wait, If it's talking only about the shadow and not the extended part of the shadow, maybe michlal de l'tzel tzila afilu lechatchila yeshev. Maybe then it means if you're in the extended part of the shadow, that's not even mentioned in this line. In which case, lo yeshev b'tzila is only in the tzel and only in the major part of the tzel, but not the extended part. And maybe you can actually sit there intentionally and say, hey, a nice place to sit. No, you definitely can't sit there either. But hakamashmalam, chidush is again focusing on what are they. Everything's included here, both sel shila, on both sides of the sentence. But what I really want to teach you is the end there. Afilu litzel kamatayim yeshav tahor. Even when you're in the real part where the shadow is pretty strong, you still can't. You still don't become impure. You still remain pure. Okay, you might have thought you become impure. No, the chiddush is you don't. And those both answer both our potential questions about, isn't this obvious? Well, one part was a little less obvious. V'lo ya'avor tachta, next part of the mission. Don't go underneath it, under the tree, v'im avar tamein. If you are, you become impure. My time, and what's the reason? Because iyafshar deleket tikrovet avodah zarah. There's no way, there's not, if you're under an Asherah tree, there's no way, there's no something buried underneath there, there's not some idol somewhere there. And Mane, who, according to who is this? I mentioned already before, Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera. Tanya, as it says in a Braita, Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera Omel, Minayim l'tikrovet avodah zarah shemitama ba'oel. How do you know that a tikrovet for avodah zarah is, right, that anything that was offered for avodah zarah carries impurity like a tent. So if I stand over it, I'll become impure, just like a cemetery. Shenema v'yitzamdu lebal pa'or. This is when they worshipped idols in Bamidbar. Vayochred, after the Zimri Cosby incident, Vayochlu zivchei metim. And then they ate zivchei metim. This is in the Zimri Cosby incident, sorry, not after, it was in it. And then they ate from zivchei metim. We've seen this pasuk a bunch of times. Ma meit metamei ba'ol, after krovet avodah zarah metamei ba'ol. So now we say, why is it called them zivchei metim? Because it has the properties of a dead person, that it carries impurities. And this isn't a Torah law, it's the rabbis instituted this to keep us away from them. If your tree is jutting out into the public, next line in the Mishnah, and you pass underneath, you're impure. You remain pure. So now comes our question that I mentioned. Is it only if you passed underneath, but you shouldn't ideally, or you can actually pass underneath without a problem? Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar Mishmei Chizkiah Amar Over. So Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar says in the name of Chizkiah, Over. You can go under. No problem. You see it there? Go for it. There's nothing problematic about it. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Imafal. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, don't go under it. But if you did, you'll remain pure. Velo pligi. And in fact, though, they really don't disagree. Hadi ikadir kachrina. If there's some other path to go, then ideally, don't walk under it. That's Rabbi Yochanan. Go some other way. If you happen to pass under it anyway, you'll remain pure. But if there's no other way to go, then Chizkiah is talking about that. You're allowed to go lechatchila because we don't make you, you got to get to somewhere. We're going to allow you to do that because it's in the public domain. Amarle Rav Sheshet l'shameh. Rav Sheshet said to his attendant. Now Rav Sheshet was blind, so he had someone who helped him walk, and he knew about the Asherah tree. But he couldn't see it. So he says to his attendant, Kimati lahatam alihitani. When we get there, please help me run. Okay, tell me, run now. So now the Gemara says, Hechidami, what's the case? If there's no other way to go, doesn't need to run. It's totally permitted. If there is another way to go, there's some other way to go, it's not permitted for him to walk under there. So what's going to help if he runs? Can't even go under it at all. To which they answer, we're going to explain there is a different way to go, but there isn't a different way to go. So he had to go under there. But since he was an important, prominent person, he should run. Because right, first of all, important, prominent people, right, have to be held in a bit of a higher standard. Because first of all, usually it's really because people look at you and learn from your actions. People might not know the distinction. And if they see he runs, at least they'll understand, oh, there's something going on here. And then they'll learn and they'll understand. And they won't misunderstand what he's doing. Okay, so this Mishnah, again, today we're reviewing as we go, is not to sit in the shadow of the tree, but if you do, you remain pure, but under the tree, you actually become impure. That's like impurity to the dead, and you shouldn't sit there, obviously. You should pass underneath there, okay? Besides sitting, you shouldn't even pass underneath, only if it's in the public domain, and then depending on the situation, either ideally or not ideally. If you go under, at least you won't become impure. But right, if there is some other way to go, better not to choose that way. Okay, now we get to the last Mishnah for today. If you have an Eitz Hashera, you can plant, we mentioned this Mishnah earlier, plant vegetables in the winter months, but not in the summer months, because in the summer months, you're going to enjoy the shade. Chazirim, which is chazeret, okay, it's stalks of lettuce, type of lettuce, lo b'yemot hachama v'lo b'yemot hagshemim, you can't do it at all because they always enjoy the shade. Rabbi Yossi Omer, af lo yirakot b'yemot hagshemim, even not vegetables in the winter, even vegetables, it's a problem because even though they're not enjoying the shade at all, because the leaves fall and it fertilizes the ground. And it fertilizes your vegetables. So you can't plant underneath even in the winter when you're not benefiting from the shade, according to Rabbi Yossi, because of the fertilizing. Now this raises a big problem because the fertilizing we already learned is zev gorim, because we had it with the Zorah Ruach. If you remember, you scatter the idol and crush it up into pieces, scatter it into the wind, and then we had this homachloket. But isn't it causing it to fertilize the ground or not? So Lememra, it sounds like Rabbi Yossi savar zev gorem asul, right? Rabbi Yossi forbids it. Sounds like zev gorem is forbidden because what fertilizes? Well, the leaves are going to fertilize, but it's also going to be fertilized by the soil, by other things that fall upon it. Fertilizer is a mix of heter and isser. Because of that, it sounds like Rabbi Yossi says, we don't care that heter and isser is mixed in. Since there's isser in there, those leaves from the Asherah tree, it's forbidden. They're benefiting. The Rabbanan amre zev gorem mutar. And the rabbis, it sounds like they're saying zev gorem is permitted because they don't have the problem with the fertilizing here. What's the problem with this? Well, we actually learned the exact opposite in Daf Mem Gimel. Why? Well, Rabbi Yossi Omer, shochek v'zoreh l'roach o matil hayam. You can crush it up into pieces and scatter it into the wind, even though it's going to actually fertilize the soil. Zev gorem is permitted according to Rabbi Yossi. Amrulo, the rabbi said to him, what happened to the zevel? Afinas hazevel shenemar lo yidbak biyadcha mumam and and you're benefiting from a little bit of avodah zarah, which is a problem. Even though zev gorem, right? Still, it sounds like it's aser. So we have kasha de Rabbanan and de Rabbanan. Kasha de Rabbi Yossi de Rabbi Yossi. Each one contradicts himself. So now we're going to try to explain. Bishlamah de Rabbi Yossi de Rabbi Yossi lo kasha. You can distinguish between the cases according to Rabbi Yossi and say the following. Hatam with the shochek v'zoreh l'roach deka'azil li'ibud matir. We're going to be more lenient there. Why? Because it's meant to be destroyed. Okay, this can mean a lot of things. First of all, you're trying to destroy it. That's your whole point. So you don't really want the dust. You just scatter it, but it's not really significant. Or the amount that you end up with is teeny compared to what else is fertilizing the soil, because in each place there's teeny little drops, okay? Or perhaps there are other explanations as well. But here, first of all, you didn't crush something up and try to get rid of it. It just fell on its own. And it's actually whole leaves that are kind of big and they're fertilizing. So it's not really something that gets lost, okay? Or is meant to get lost. So therefore, you could say that's why it's forbidden. And that's why Rabbi Yossi has a difference in each case. But the rabbis who go the opposite direction, you can't explain that. Ela d'Rabbanan kasha. Okay, but we still have a problem with the rabbis. So we're going to have two ways to deal with this. One is ipuch. Flip Rabbi Yossi and the rabbis in our Mishnah, and then everything's going to match up perfect. That's one option. Ibai dema. Okay, they always try not to do that if we can avoid it. Ibai dema lo tipuch. Don't flip them. To Rabbi Yossi, Kiddushanit. So the contradiction with Rabbi Yossi, we already explained. To Rabbanan, Keda Amar of Mary, Bered Rav Kana, Mash Mashbeach Ba'or Pogem Ba'Basal, Hachinami Mash Mashbeach B'Niviyah Pogem Ba'Tzeh. We're going to take something Rav Mary said somewhere else, which is a totally different subject. If I have an animal that was disqualified, was sanctified for the temple, and then for a sacrifice, and then became disqualified, got a blemish, let's say. So what do? We basically can, depending on the situation, but basically we can sell it, okay? Now, if it's blemished, right, it can be sold. And then you can sell the hide and you can sell the meat and take the money and use sacrifice. Now, the money belongs to the temple. So we always want to get to the highest amount of money. So now we have a bit of a conflict because if we take off the hide all at once without cutting up the animal, you're going to end up with a much better piece of leather, right? That you can make into leather and make something big with it. If you have little pieces, it's not going to be, you're going to lose money on it. So therefore, the ideal would be to take off all the hide before cutting up the animal. The problem is you're going to lose some of the meat. So the halacha is actually you're not allowed. You have to actually cut up the pieces. You're not allowed to take off the hide when it's full because it's going to ruin the meat. They say, but what about the fact that it ruins the hide by cutting it up? And so they say, well, what you gain by that, you lose by that. So even though you'll gain by having a better hide, you're going to lose it because the meat is ruined from that because the meat now ends up, right? When you pull off the whole thing at once, you're going to lose some of the meat. It's going to stick to the hide and you're not going to be able to do anything with that. So basically, there's in the end, the benefit of one is going to outweigh the benefit of the other. Okay. And really the issue is bizayon kodashim. Okay. It's disgraceful to do this also there's an issue of bizayon kodashim, and that's basically ruining the meat. So we're going to go with the meat rather than the hide. So even though, okay, that's what we said, masha mashbiach, but or what you're gaining for the or is actually pogam babasal. So in the end, there's no real gain by doing it in that way, by by taking off the skin while it's whole. But hachanami, so the same thing here. Masha mashbiach b'niviyah. Now, while on the one hand, it's fertilizing and benefiting the fertilization, and that's what Rabbi Yossi is claiming, benefiting the soil, but your vegetables. But in the end, your vegetables are being ruined by the dropping of the leaves because now there's no shade. So you're basically, right? You're basically gaining something, losing something else. So that's how we can explain the rabbis. So we had two ways to resolve this contradiction. But now we have another question. According to this last explanation, we're going to keep Rabbi Yossi where we thought he was, which is Zevazeh Gorem Asur, okay, is forbidden. Tanya, but doesn't it say in a Braita somewhere else that Zevazeh Gorem is mutar, according to Rabbi Yossi? Let's see. We'll just start this today. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Nut'im Yichor Shel Orla. You can plant a branch of Orla, or twigs or stems of Orla, ve'ein not'im egoz shel Orla mipnei shu pri. But what's forbidden of Orla is the fruits of the tree, right? This is the first 3 years. You're not allowed to benefit from the fruits, but all the other parts of the tree are not edible. You can benefit from them. So you can replant a yichor of Orla, but you can't replant a nut of Orla. However, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Modeh Rabbi Yossi agrees though, she'im nata v'rich v'irkiv mutar. If you planted the nut and grafted it, or did this shoot thing, replanting one of the shoots with it, then it's Zevazeh Gorem and it'll be permitted, okay? Because you have Heter and Isser together. So here it sounds like he's saying Zevazeh Gorem is permitted. So we have to deal with that, and we're going to get back to that tomorrow. Okay, so this, again, we did the review as we were going. Now just review the last one. We talked about this machloket, Rabbi Yossi and the rabbis, and how their positions seem to be the opposite in a different sugya that we saw recently, and how do we reconcile that contradiction. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.